Imagine it's May 2024 and you start reading your first book. And all of a sudden, this happens. 2024 marks the year that I started to fully delve into reading again, because if I start to do something, I don't do it half-assed. So in 2024, I have read 56 books, and today is the video where we talk about all of them. So to not have you have to listen to me for 2 hours straight, I am just gonna go about the books briefly. The star ratings will be shown up here in the corner, and I will just tell you if I recommend the book, if I liked it, what I liked about it, and that is that. So for a little backstory, I have always loved delving into fictional worlds, whether it was through films, through series, or through games, and as of recently through books. I used to read a lot of books when I was younger, like about 10 years ago, and then I kind of stopped reading, and reading has been on the back burner for a bit. But I picked up my first book this year, and then I picked up a second, and I was like, oh, I do really love reading. I do. And yeah, here we are. So let's look at the stats. I have read 56 books, as I've mentioned. The shortest book that I've read is 144 pages. The longest book I read was 984 pages. My average star rating of this year was a 4.1, which makes sense because there were a lot of books that I really loved in here. So the genre I read most was fantasy with 24 books. After that, we have mystery thrillers with 16 books. Then we have some bunched up general fiction with 6. I've read 4 non-fiction books. I read 4 romance books and 2 sci-fi books. Now, without further ado, drumroll, let's get into all the books that I read. So we're gonna start off with my least read genre, which is sci-fi. First sci-fi book is Red Rising, which I actually really enjoyed. What I loved in this book was the world that it was set in. I love the whole Hunger Games in space aspect. I love the trials and tribulations. I don't know if that's the word, but I love that. So I would recommend this book, not to everyone. If you're like mainly a romance reader, this is probably not for you. Maybe for fantasy readers. If you enjoy space, I think this would be a good one. As I said, Hunger Games in Space basically sums up the first book in the Red Rising series. Next up, Project Hail Mary. This I recommend to everyone. Read it, please. Please. I absolutely adore this book. I love the banter in this book. I love the writing style of this book. I enjoyed the whole story. I love the ending of this book. This was like a perfect book. There is a lot of like science stuff in this book. You may not expect this, but I am not a scientist. But the science talk didn't bother me at all. I actually thought it was quite interesting. Highly, highly recommend Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Next up, romance. The first romance book I've read was The 7 Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I thoroughly enjoy this, actually. I am not a very big romance reader. I tend to find romance books a little bit cringe, but it might have just been that I've read the wrong romance books, because all the romance books that I've read this year I actually really enjoyed. So maybe it's just a me problem. It is most likely a me problem, but The 7 Year Slip was actually a really good one. I would highly recommend this one. I've heard mostly positive, if only positive, things about this book as well. So if you enjoy romance, this book has some magical realism in there. I just thought the love story was really, really cute. So this one is a recommend, yes. The next romance books are all by the same author. The first one that I read by her is Happy Place. I'm talking about Emily Henry, well-known author in the romance space, highly praised for her work in romance. It is romance with an emotional punch. If you saw this book, you would not think that. I did not think that at first. From the 3 Emily Henry books, this comes in second place. Happy Place, really, really lovely. I would highly recommend this. The banter was really cute in this. I love the emotional aspect of this book, which I really resonated with. So, Happy Place, definitely a recommend. The next book is People We Met on Vacation, which is also by Emily Henry, and this ranks on 3rd on my Emily Henry ranking. I like this, but I didn't connect as much with the characters. So I would still say recommend, but I personally just didn't really connect with them fully, which in a romance book is kind of important that you like the main characters that you're following. It was just a bit of a miss. I thought the story was cute. It was just the characters that didn't really resonate with me. So this is number 3 on my Emily Henry ranking. Number 1 on my Emily Henry ranking is Book Lovers, which I absolutely adored. I loved their dynamic. I loved Nora as a character because she is not your typical romance lead. I enjoyed her thoroughly. I enjoyed Charlie as well, which is the male main character. I liked their story. I thought the emotional aspect in this book was really good as well, all about family and friendship and what you do for each other, and I highly recommend this one. This is my favorite Emily Henry book that I've read so far. Next up, we have some bunched up general fiction. The first one is a Greek mythology, but I've only read one Greek myth book. It's a retelling, and so I didn't want to give it its own category because I don't recommend this one. Yeah, I don't know. I am really fascinated with Greek mythology, so I thought I would absolutely enjoy this book. It was just, I like the writing style, yet the pacing, I think it was the pacing of this book that threw me for a loop because there were random time jumps, and then also the love depiction in this book was not really something I liked. Wasn't for me. So Ariadne by Jennifer Saint is a do not recommend for me, unfortunately. Next up is a classic, which I also put in general fiction. This is The Great Gatsby, a wonderful story that has been adapted into film. It is a classic for a reason. I really, really enjoyed it, which shows the lavish side of the jazz age. What I do feel like would make the book a bit better is to also show the other side of the jazz age and not just the glamorous party going side. However, I really enjoyed this book. It is a short one, so I flew through it. I would, for anyone that has not read it, recommend The Great Gatsby. If you don't read the book, go watch the movie, because I thought the movie was great as well. So yes, Great Gatsby is a recommend for me. Next up is a book that might be written by one of my new favourite authors. I've only read one of his books, but I can't wait to read more. And it's A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. I just loved the way this was written. I love Ove. I also think the way that he writes about these real, raw emotions and feelings is just, I don't know. This book captivated me. I would highly recommend A Man Called Ove to anyone. The movie, again, A Man Called Otto, is also great. So, you know, if you don't read the book, go watch the movie. But I would highly, highly recommend. I can't wait to read more of his books. There are a few more on my mental TBR for the next year. So, yes, recommend. Another recommend. It's called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I just think this book is wonderful. I was in my tabbing phase, as you could see. I have since stopped tabbing. But I thought that this book was a really, really great depiction of just life. Life with its ups, its downs, friendship, love, loss, grief, everything in this book. It follows 2 characters who are game developers. It follows them through a few decades, if I'm not mistaken. And I just thought it was done really, really beautifully. If you feel like reading about 2 game devs is not up your alley, I would kindly encourage you to think again, because yes, part of this book is about game development and games, but it is just so much more than that. So Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin is a definite recommend from me. Next up we have Yellow Phase. I don't know what to think about this book, and I think my main problem with this is that I read it in Dutch, and I feel like some things just get lost in translation. Well, I don't know if lost in translation is the right word for it, but I do think that I would enjoy this book more if it was in English. The main reason I read mostly in English, my thinking is mostly in English, so English just reads a lot better for me, and when I read in Dutch, I have to think about it more, which does not make sense at all, as I am in fact Dutch, and I speak Dutch every day of my life. I have lived and breathed Dutch my whole life, yet reading in Dutch, for some reason, just eh. So Yellowface, I would still recommend because, again, I do think I would enjoy it more if it was in English. So I would recommend this book. When I read it, I had to think on it. And the last book in this category is The Traveling Cat Chronicles, which was just a wonderful story. It was recommended by a friend of mine during a TBR video. I had never heard of this book, but I would recommend it to everyone. I think reading from the POV of a cat it was funny. The cat was just hilarious. I also think that the whole story was just wonderful. The ending of this book was tragic yet beautiful, and I would highly recommend you pick up this book. It is a short one. It's a short and sweet one, so please go read it when you have the time. So, to change up the pacing, next is a rapid fire round. I read The Compound Effect. I read Super Communicators. I read No Excuses. And I read Discipline is Destiny. Those are the non-fiction books I've read. On to the mystery thrillers. So I just bunched mystery and thriller together, but I will tell you if it was more so a mystery or more so a thriller. Alright, sounds like a good deal. So the first book is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I actually really, really enjoyed this book. I was in a massive book slump when I read this book, but I made it through. And actually relatively quickly, so it did grip me. And I rated it fairly highly. So yes, I would recommend The Silent Patient. I would say this is more so a thriller rather than a mystery. Highly recommend The Silent Patient. So the next book in this category is The Fury, also by Alex Michaelides. I am meh about this book. I don't think I would recommend this book. So this was also more described as a why done it instead of a who done it. I think the narration of this book was really, really great. It was just, there was something about this book that just, it didn't hit for me. I don't know. No, I wouldn't recommend this one. Next up is a trilogy, which is the Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy, which is a mouthful. I really, really enjoyed this. The first book is more so a mystery rather than a thriller. The last book is more so a thriller, which we'll get to. I really enjoyed this whole series. I think Holly Jackson uses mixed media in this, so you have like pictures or transcripts, or she runs a podcast at some point, so you have like transcriptions of the podcast. It also makes the book go by a bit quicker, so the pacing is a bit quicker, which it makes it easier to binge this book and also like fully delve into the story. I don't know if this book would be as good if you read it in like little bits and pieces, but I read it in basically one sitting, thoroughly enjoyed it, which this one highly recommend, and made me go into the second and the third book of the series. The second book is Good Girl, Bad Blood, which I also recommend, obviously. This was also more a mystery rather than a thriller. Again, mixed media, reads quickly, highly recommend. And then the last book is As Good as Dead. This was more a thriller. I would highly recommend it, yet the ending of this book, I felt like we spent so long with like the setup of the story, and we spent so long that the ending just felt a bit rushed, in my opinion. It felt like it wrapped up quite quickly, where I feel like maybe we could cut down the first like half of this book a little bit and then expend more on the ending and the aftermath. Yet I would still highly recommend this book. This was actually quite thrilling. For someone that reads quite a bit of thrillers, I actually thought this was a little bit thrilling. It got my heart racing at some points. Next up, we have The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell, which, meh. I don't think I would recommend this book. I listened to it actually on my walks, which it was nice. The narration was really nice because it had like 3 narrators for each point of view. I just figured the plot twist quite quickly. It is a thriller, definitely, and yeah, I don't recommend this one, but the one that I do recommend, also by Lisa Jewell, is None of This Is True. Also a thriller. This thrilled me. I don't know what was going on in Lisa Jewell's head, but this was really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. This also has a little bit of mixed media. It has some podcast transcripts in there. I just thought this book was done really, really well. I highly recommend this book. So if you're going to pick up any Lisa Jewell book, let it be this one. Next up, we have a bit of a disappointing one. The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I was really disappointed by this one, actually, because I heard so many good things about this book, and then I read it, and I was like, is this really the book that people are raving about so much? I felt like it was written by a 12-year-old. Well, not necessarily written by a 12-year-old. It was more so like you were in the mind of the protagonist, and yeah, it just felt like reading a 12-year-old's diary. Like her thoughts, and she's meant to be a convict. I don't know, man. I'm really sad about this because I wanted to love this so much because I've heard so many good things about it, and there's more books in the Housemaid series which I'm not gonna read, so it's a no for me. I don't recommend this one. What I do recommend, however, is the Natural series, which, you know, the concept of this is a little bit silly, all right? It's like kids joining the FBI. It's like kids joining the FBI because they have some natural talent. Like one of them is like a natural lie detector. The other one is a natural profiler. The other one is a natural with numbers. It's a bit silly, all right? But hear me out. It is really, really good. I really enjoyed this series. I think the characters were so cute, so lovely. They had some real backstories that were actually delved in throughout the whole series. Each book kind of revolves around a mystery, because these are more so mysteries rather than thrillers. It revolves around a mystery of one of the naturals. I think it was really lovely. The first book is The Naturals. The second book is Killer Instinct. The third book is All In. And the final book is Bad Blood. And this also has the little novella called 12. I don't recommend the novella. The novella is a bit unnecessary. I read the whole series, just skip the novella. That was a not recommend for me. But this whole series was really good. My favorite in the series is All In because it revolves around a character that I just love dearly. I loved her very much. So, yes, Natural series is a highly recommend for me. Next up, we actually have the first book that I read. Woo! It's a Stephen King. It's called The Green Mile. I also read this in Dutch. De Groene Mijl. This is the first book that I read this year. This is the book that got me into reading. Well, I think it is one of the books that got me into reading. I've always read mystery thrillers. This is a thriller. And when I was younger, I always read thrillers. So I think a thriller was a good way to get me into reading again. But the next 2 books that I read, which was Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, are probably the books that really got me into reading. I know, it was Fourth Wing. Yes, yes it was. But yeah, Stephen King, The Green Mile, I would recommend this book. To be honest, I don't remember a whole lot of what was going on in this book, but I do remember really enjoying it at the time. So, The Green Mile is a recommend for me. And then we have another one that I read in Dutch. This is a thriller as well, a more so psychological thriller. This is Karen Slaughter, After That Night. I read Karen Slaughter a lot when I was younger, like 10 to 15 years ago. Is this a good author to read as a 12-year-old? Maybe not. But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed her books, and this was no different. I don't mind reading her books in Dutch because I've always done that, even when I was younger. So Karen Slaughter, After That Night, was really good. I think on the scale of all her books that I've read, it is more so towards the top, maybe because it's freshest on my memory, but I really thoroughly enjoyed this book. Then we have two more mystery thrillers. The first one was The Last Book to Woodstock. I listened to this when I was on my walk. I would not recommend this book. I finished it though, but nah, I also can't really tell you anything about it. There's like a murder mystery. And then the second mystery book is actually one that I don't own anymore because, again, I don't recommend it, which was The Perfect Crime by Helen Field. I just guessed the plot twist on like page 2. So, you know, for a thriller, that wasn't great. I would say this one was really in the middle of like a mystery and a thriller, but yeah, don't recommend that one. I could figure it out quite quickly. You might enjoy it though. You might enjoy it. However, I can't say whether you will or not, but yeah, I guess the plot twist quite quickly, so that was a no for me. And then next up, we're gonna go to my favorite category, which is fantasy. I love fantasy books. I've read a bunch of them. I read mostly fantasy books this year, so let's go through them. So the first fantasy book is a short and sweet one, which is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I would recommend this. It was cute, it was fun, it was quick. I think this is classified as like a classic as well. I would recommend it if you have some time to spare. It was a cute story. Then next up we have a duology, which is One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns, which was, in my opinion, a perfect duology. It just wrapped up perfectly. I thought it was really well written. I like the whole vibe of this. It has a bit of a like gothic-y vibe, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I think the magic system in these books was really nice and really well thought out as well. It's like magic through playing cards, which was so unique. I've not read another fantasy that uses playing cards for magic, so I thought it was really well done. This is, I think, Rachel Gillick's like debut duology, and I just thought it was so well done. I can't wait to see what else she comes out with. Highly recommend these two. Next up, we have a really cozy book. I think this is classified as cozy fantasy. I just thought it was so lovely. It is The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. I just thought this was cute. Cute is really cute, and cozy is the only adjectives I can find to describe it. I think the story was lovely. The world was really nicely built. This takes place on a little island, and all the creatures and critters that live there really made the story what it was. I just think this was really cute. I would recommend this book, yes. And we have Powerless by Lauren Roberts. I really enjoyed this book. I think the banter in this book was really cute. This had some like trials in there as well, and I love me a trial in a fantasy book. I'm a sucker for it. This is more so classified as romantasy, so the romance in this book I thought was really nice as well. I thought it was lovely. I loved our characters. I loved our female protagonist's best friend, who got a novella, which is powerful. Read that too. It takes place on the same timeline as Powerless. This was just a little extra. It's absolutely not necessary to read this, but I would still recommend it. It was really, really cute. Adina is just a bubble of sunshine. She really is. And if you know how Powerless ends, you know how this is gonna end. But I just loved this. And Powerless as well. I just really enjoyed that story, so I would highly recommend those. Next up, we have Fourth Wing, and I think Fourth Wing is the book that actually got me into reading. It just read so quickly. It's the first fantasy I've ever read, and I think that helps the rating as well and how I felt about this book. I didn't have any prior thoughts to fantasy or romantasy. I thought it was done really nicely. I liked the romance in this. There was some spice in here as well, which I enjoyed. I wasn't opposed to. I just think the story was nice. I liked it. I don't know that if you are a avid fantasy reader that you're gonna enjoy this book. You might. I have no idea. I don't know if I would enjoy this book as much as I did if I read it now after reading more fantasy, but I would still highly recommend Fourth Wing if you haven't read it, because it's been hyped up pretty bigly. But if you haven't read Fourth Wing, I would recommend. And then we have the second book, which is Iron Flame, which, unlike popular opinion, I actually enjoyed more than the first book. Yes, there was this whole miscommunication, bickering part in there in the romance, but the romance is like a subplot for me anyway. But there was a bunch more world building in this. There was a bunch more politics in this, which I enjoyed reading about. I love reading about politics in fantasy books, so I would still recommend Iron Flame. The next fantasy books I've read is the entire Throne of Glass series. I started the series off with Assassin's Blade, and I would highly recommend you read this as it is a prequel to the Throne of Glass series, and I feel like you can really start to get connected with the main protagonist by reading this first before going into the actual Throne of Glass series. Obviously, as you saw from the ratings, I do highly recommend this series. Please go read it. I think it got better as the series progressed. However, I read Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn separately, and I felt like it was a little bit much of a certain POV, so I would recommend, if you read the series, to tandem read Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn, because then it switches up the POVs. Yes, it is a bigger chunk to read, but you're gonna get through both books anyway. It's just gonna take you a little bit longer, but I do think that would improve the reading experience. But Throne of Glass by Sarah J Maas is a highly recommend. Yes, please go read it. And then lastly, we have my Brandon Sanderson reads. I discovered Brandon Sanderson this year, as I discovered all the other authors this year. But he's turned out to be my favourite author of this year. Really love this book. I've read the Final Empire series, which is Final Empire, Well of Ascension, and Hero of Ages. I absolutely adore this. This is a 5-star series for me. All of the books were 5 stars in this series. My favourite of the 3 is The Well of Ascension. I think that plot line were just my favorite of the series. I loved the other 2 books. However, I absolutely adored the found family in this book. I love the way Brandon Sanderson writes. I also love that he's not scared to kill a character off, which in some fantasies you already know kind of that the people you're rooting for are not gonna die. Brandon Sanderson is not afraid to say goodbye to a character, and I really enjoy that, because that just makes the stakes even higher in these books. So highly recommend part 1 of the Mistborn series. I've also started Mistborn part 2, which I have read Alloy of Law and Shadows of Self. This takes place, I think, 300 years after Mistborn Part 1. You're following completely different characters, but in the same world, and still the same like rules about like magic and stuff apply. So far, recommend. So far, Part 1 is still my favorite. So these 2 are both 4 stars for me, 4.5 stars. I still really love them, but I love Mistborn Part 1 even more. But maybe if I continue this Part 2, I will start to love that the same amount, if not more. Who knows? And then the final and last book that we're going to be talking about is Tress of the Emerald Sea, also written by Brandon Sanderson. Also amazing. This is just a standalone. I just loved it. It was cozy, it was cute, the story was funny, the characters were funny in there. It is not related, I think, in any way to any of the other books. There is a lot of books in the Cosmere. I've only read 6, so it might be connected to some of the other books, and I just haven't caught it. But Tress of the Emerald Sea is also a highly recommend. This one is a 4 stars for me. But Brandon Sanderson as an author, please go read. I would recommend. My next endeavor is actually going to be the Way of Kings series, which is, this book is over 1,000 pages, and it's the smallest book in the series. So it's very intimidating, but I'm very excited to get into this series as well. So these are all the books that I've read in 2024. Let's hope 2025 is just as fruitful as this year was. Let me know down below what your favorite book was that you've read this year, and if you've read any, if not all, of the books that I've read as well. For now, thank you so much for watching. I won't make this any longer than this video is probably already gonna be, but thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, I would kindly ask you to leave a like and subscribe down below if you haven't already. Ding the bell to get any notifications whenever I post a video. I hope you have a wonderful New Year's, and I will see you all in 2025. Goodbye.